Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Wrestling Conversations. Our guest for this episode is Kyle Peterson. Kyle, how are you?
Hello, thank you for having me on the show tonight.
Absolutely. In all transparency, this is take two for Kyle and I, where we had some internet trouble. We got going for 7 or 8 minutes and had to abruptly pause and restart here. So we're gonna try this again. But lots of things I wanted to kind of talk to you today about, Kyle. I want to talk about your YouTube show, this wrestling kind of fandom in general. I know I mentioned this to you when we had our first take here, but I always try to weave some figure talk into the interviews I do. If there's anybody I have on, like Jeremy and Stephen from Fightful, I know I mentioned them before too, but they are some guys I both had on. Stephen in particular is a figure guy, so I try to always weave that into my podcast interviews. So I'd like to discuss that a little bit today with you. But as I just kind of way to start, how were you first introduced into wrestling?
Yeah, I started, and it's always kind of murky for me. I've always tried to pinpoint it perfectly. I just know it was the summertime after WrestleMania 3. So I was very little at the time, but obviously coming off Andre, Hulk Hogan, at WrestleMania 3, I want to say it was probably around August, probably around the start of school, because I remember everybody talking wrestling where, summertime is like 3 months. It felt like a lifetime when you're a little kid, and nobody was talking wrestling before school got out. But once school started back up, for whatever reason, a lot of kids were talking wrestling. I ended up looking into it and said, okay, what's this all about? And the rest is history. I never stopped watching wrestling from that point on.
Sure. And so we talked a little bit about and our previous recording too, whether figures or actually watching wrestling came first. And you had mentioned that you were a figure guy first, and you really came up in the perfect time frame. Where right, you've had the LJNs, you had Hasbro's. I am very jealous of that as someone that started watching wrestling early 2000s, where we had the Titantrons right away, so that was kind of my first exposure. So do you have any LJNs or any Hasbro's that stand out to you as favorite wrestling figures?
Oh yeah. So yeah, I was a wrestling fan first and then into the figures from there. But yeah, I mean, glory days of playing as a little kid with the LJNs and Hasbro's. I mean, so many hours of my life dedicated to setting up matches, having Royal Rumbles, things like that. So many great figures. My first figure I ever got from LJN was Outback Jack, of all people, who I don't even think I ever saw as a kid wrestle, but he was on the shelf. I guess we call him a peg warmer these days, but that was the first figure I ever got. But I mean, just the Ultimate Warrior was a huge one for my childhood. Still to this day, I can remember getting that and how big of a deal that was in the LJN, as it was extremely rare. Didn't know it at the time, but extremely rare. Getting that one was such a big deal in my playing days. But, Andre, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Big Boss Man, I mean, Haku, Warlord, Demolition. I mean, there were so many back then that were so great. And then into the Mattel or the Hasbro days, just absolutely amazing. I'll never forget the first time going to Toys R Us, and the Toys R Us back in a lot of the Toys R Us, you used to walk in, take a ride, and it kind of weaved you through. And I'll never forget them having just a wall, which seemed like it was 100 feet long, but it was probably 4 8 feet. When you're a little kid, it felt like 100. It was full of the Hasbro's, and I'd never seen them, and there was no internet back then, so just like, what is this? Oh my gosh! And going from huge LJN figures to smaller Hasbro was absolutely crazy. And I always say I kind of came up, at least for me personally, I always feel that was the glory years of collecting wrestling figures or playing wrestling figures, because I was in between LJNs and Hasbro's, and I got to experience both of those in my active playing days as a little kid.
Sure. Yeah, it's a pretty good time. What other toy lines when you were a kid were you really into?
Yeah, I mean, it all started with He-Man. I think for a lot of kids my age, He-Man was kind of the gateway drug into action figures, and, tying it into the cartoon and reenacting battles, things like that. I mean, that's some of my earliest memories in life, were going to, I think it was maybe a Sears or something like that, with my parents, and they had He-Man and Skeletor there, and getting to see them and get my picture taken with them and getting figures. And then, of course, some Star Wars figures around that time. Obviously, Star Wars was huge. The last movie at the time was kind of done, so Star Wars was dwindling out, but it was definitely wrestling, but also G.I. Joe's my heaviest of heavy hitter. I mean, that was my favorite figures as a kid. That and wrestling were huge, but G.I. Joe probably got the Duke for me as a kid in my playing days.
Sure. And I think there was kind of a point in time for me, like growing up, where yes, I played with figures, but then it got to the point where I was also collecting them too. Were you, like, as a kid, were you were you collecting them, or were you just playing, or was it some of each?
It's weird because it's an interesting question. I guess I'd have to say a little bit of both. I mean, I remember going, to Children's Palace was a place back in the day. Before Toys R Us was kind of in the Midwest, it was Children's Palace. And I remember being on my dad's shoulders as a little kid and going to like the G.I. Joes, and I'd be looking up at the top and he'd be down here. But I don't know if my dad gave me, and my dad was a figure collector as well. So he was big into the starting lineup figures, things like that. So we'd go on a figure hunt. He'd get those. I'd get my stuff. So I really do think I was collecting, and I was also displaying like my wrestlers, my G.I. Joes. I never thought of it as displaying, but when I think back, it's like I didn't just throw them in a tub. They weren't just like in a tub or a box when I wasn't playing with them. They were displayed. I had the aircraft carrier. They'd always be displayed. If I wasn't playing with them, I'd put them back up like a kind of a diorama, I guess you would say. And same with my wrestlers. I'd put them, on a shelf and in the ring and just kind of ready to go. So I guess I was doing both without even knowing it.
Like with your dad being a collector, that's something. My dad is a collector of other things, so he kind of gets like the even though he doesn't collect figures, but he's into lots of different sports things, so he kind of gets it. Like, did you have your dad like at home displaying things too? Like, did you kind of pick up on some of his habits, or was he more of a guy that was okay? You collect starting lineups, but they're tucked away in a tote or something like that.
Oh, so yeah, my dad as a kid, they were like called Gartland USA. I mean, my dad was born in the 50s. So, I mean, this is probably early 60s, but they were like, LJN size statues of baseball players, things like that. He collected those as a kid and absolutely loved them. And then I remember starting lineups came out in 1988, and I was buying wrestling figures, G.I. Joes at the time. And we went in and he saw those and was like, oh, gosh, he loved sporting figures, brought him back to his childhood, not quite the same size or style, but I remember in 1988 him saying, these are god awful. These don't look anything like the characters. I'm not buying these. These are no way. But then in 1989, he had a change of his mind, I guess, and started to go deep down the rabbit hole. And that snowballed into us looking, he'd wake me up. It was like a childhood dream. He'd wake me up on a Saturday morning. Okay, we're going to Venture, 4 Walmarts, 5 Targets, KD Toys. Like, we'd hit the whole road. We'd go to then it'd be a toy show or a card show. I mean, I was collecting baseball cards, things like that as well. And we went to the starting lineup conventions and all that kind of stuff. So he was deep into it, and we had a heck of a display. I think the displaying I do in this day and age in my house is a direct correlation of how my dad did, because our basement, he also bought a house, finished his basement, and used it to display his starting lineup collection on the walls, and all the walls were covered in starting lineup figures. And I used to bring my friends down when I was a kid and teenager. And I mean, it was just everybody like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. And I guess I've carried on the tradition all these years later.
Well, I have to know this. And for people that have not seen Kyle's YouTube channel too, like he has several different tour videos that have had like hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube because it's just so impressive. So if you haven't seen Kyle's videos, there's figures galore in that space. And maybe you're at the point where maybe this doesn't happen to you. And I have a collection on a smaller scale than you, but I've got a room's worth of stuff. And if people don't know that I collect things and they walk in, that's one of my favorite things to see, like what their reaction is. Do you have that ever, or is everybody that that comes over, hey, they already know the deal before they come in?
It's funny. My daughter is 12 years old, and she just started middle school this year. So she's made, in middle school, you get a bunch of kids from different elementaries into a school. So she gets new friends and all that kind of stuff. So I've seen a lot of that this year where, she's at the age where, oh, it's not cool to, whatever. But she's so quick to show them, oh, take the tour of my dad's basement. You got to see this. And everybody's always kind of jaw dropped. And even people that have seen the tour video that have actually come over afterwards are just like, holy cow, I can't believe. It's just kind of one of those things. And I got a buddy at work, and he always tells me, you did exactly what every kid said at 9 years old. When I get my own house, this is what I'm going to do. And you actually went it. And I did. Well, and I'm very thankful to my wife. I have a very understanding wife.
Yeah, no, I think when I talked to, I think it was Paul Bromwell that I had on the show a little while back too. And he doesn't, at that point, we didn't know each other like at all. I had asked him to do an interview. Yeah. And we got along great. And then we had kind of talked about like some of the figures and stuff. I'm like, it might be a surprise. I am married. And for some reason, my wife puts up with it. But I'm like, yeah, let's, finding a wife that puts up with the things that we like is maybe not, probably not that common, unfortunately for many people, but that's great. Ball, everyone's supportive.
Yeah, every once in a while you get a comment in my YouTube videos like, oh, this guy, I bet he doesn't have a wife or a girlfriend or something like that. It's like, I've been with my wife for like 20 years.
Right. Hey, got it all then. Got it all. So kind of shifting into the channel a little bit. So I know that you started your channel I believe it was 2020, right?
Uh,
Was this like, was it
yeah,
like
it was
2019?
around, I think it was March of 2020. I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I thought it was around then. I'm like, I don't know. So how did the thought come into like, yes, because obviously you were a collector before that. How did it kind of come to your mind to start the YouTube channel?
I've got kind of a wild YouTube story. I think they call it the
Okay.
YouTube journey, which sounds really cheesy, but it is. I actually never watched YouTube until I started doing it, which is really strange. I mean, the only time I ever thought to go to YouTube was I'm a big music lover, concert goer, and stuff, and I would use YouTube to like, oh, okay, Motorhead's on tour. Let's see if there's some clips of the show, so I know we'll kind of get a peek of what I'm going to see. That's all I ever like, out of sight, out of mind. I just didn't do it. I was very focused. My career and stuff, my day job, a very busy life in that world. So I was just kind of, and then obviously really small kids, you're hooked up with all that. So I just collected in silence is kind of what I guess the best you could put it. And then a good friend of the channel, David C. Anderson, as I always say, he's a guy that lives in my area. He came over, saw the collection, all that. We've talked, we've become friends. And he's like, man, you should do a YouTube channel. And it never crossed my mind. And he's like, you should do it because you should just do exactly what you do when we sit here and talk and you get a figure. Just do that exact same thing. And that's kind of what I did. And I think that's helped me. It's all relative at the end of the day, but I didn't have any bad habits, good habits, or anything. I just was me from the start on YouTube, and I'm sure no different than your first podcast episode. You're like, okay, what do I do here? What? But
Yeah.
you figure it out and, you get those reps in, and it's all about consistency and doing it. And I didn't have I just said, okay, if I was going to do a review, how would I want to do it? So I do it for how I wanted to do it. And it's, I guess, original compared to most people is what I would say.
No, definitely. And I think there was really a need for more like wrestling content too. And you cover,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to miss some things here, but there's Marvel things, DC. Oh gosh, there's obviously you've got wrestling, you've got He-Man. There's literally everything that you could get into. All these
You got
different
Joe
lines.
Thundercats.
Yeah,
We could
yes.
go on for a day if you wanted to. I mean, it's a lot. It has, I think, ramped up my collecting too. I mean, I was always collecting wrestling. But there's been so many new lines since COVID. So yeah, there's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot to keep track of for sure.
I was going to ask you this too, because I'm assuming that there's people that do different reviews and that are on YouTube that is everything that you're buying for your videos or things that are going into your collection that you want, or do you do you get things specifically to review them for the channel, or is it some of each?
Yeah, very rarely. I mean, that's what I always say. It's like I'm not going to review something I don't like. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not going to take the time and invest in something I'm not excited about and stuff. And I've had, every once in a while I get some stuff sent to me and they'll say, hey, would you review this? And, most of the time it's stuff I'm into, but I'm like, literally every day now I get stuff. Hey, would you review this? Would you review this? And I turn that stuff down. It's like, no, especially I get some weird stuff. Like a lot of, hey, we want to send you this ceiling fan. We want to send you this light system for your house. I get weird stuff. I'm like, as cool as I would love to have this $1,000 light system for free, I'm just not. My viewers would see through that and say, wait a minute, this is phony. But if it was something, let's say it was something that would help me with my channel, something I'd actually use, maybe I would do it. But I don't get figures that I'm against. I don't get figures to be negative if that is a thing. I mean, I definitely have some negative reviews out there when something breaks or something goes south, but yeah, that's one thing a lot of people do think, oh, do you just get this stuff, review it, then sell it? No, I should sell some stuff. I got a whole stack of stuff I need to get rid of, but it's all into the collection. It all has a place, and that's kind of where it goes.
Sure.
And I'm a collector at heart.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing too. Like I have a couple things tucked away, but I'm like I've sold very, very few things in my time. Cause I feel like I'm kind of picky on what I buy to some extent. I've slowed down a little bit because it's just running out of space, I think, is the biggest thing until I get moved into a larger house where I have a little bit more space to put things. But it's one of those things that it's like, I think if people could see through that, if it's like, okay, if you get something, and having an honest take is good. Cause I think people come to a channel like yours for probably a few different reasons. I would assume it's okay. A, entertainment based, but B, it's like, okay, if I'm interested in this figure, I watch a review to see, okay, what are somebody else's thoughts on it? So, I mean, what kind of feedback do you get on videos?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much, I would say 99% positive most of the time. Obviously, like anything, you got your usual suspects that kind of comment on stuff. And every once in a while, you get people that, have no idea what they're talking about. It's crazy stuff. And I always say, you know, it's like people ask me, oh, how do you start a YouTube channel? It's funny. The first ever comment I got on YouTube is wild. It was on my tour video, the first one I ever did. The first comment after I uploaded, I hope your house burns down with you and your family in it. That was the first comment I ever got. Which I can't help but laugh at something like that. I'm like, wow, this YouTube place is crazy.
Yeah, I just can't imagine being in a space where it's like you just that's what you go to say. It's just like it takes effort to say that. You would think that you would just leave it alone, even if you didn't like the video or whatever. It's just like,
and I said, you know, it's only up from here. There can't be any worse comments than that. I still remember, and I found it funny immediately. I mean, some people could be offended and say, I'm done with this. I'm not doing this anymore, you know, or I just shrugged it off. But I always find that funny when people say, oh, I don't know. Well, here's what my first comment was. Check this out.
yeah, it's a good story to have, if nothing else. I mean, and you're one thing that is really impressive too, and I feel like that's what lots of people struggle with is like, okay, how do I keep on doing things? And I mean, you've been at this for 4 years now too, and the volume of stuff that you put out, where you've got a video coming out pretty much every day, or maybe it is every single day, but
I do 4 videos a day.
Okay.
And I've done 3 videos a day the last 2 years. In the last 6 months, I've upped it to 4. So I always say I'm extremely consistent. I might not be, I was the same way in school. I was the same way how I do it, my work life and stuff. I might not be the smartest. I might not be the best, but nobody will ever outwork me. I'll stay up 24 hours if I have to. And everybody's like, how do you do this grind of figure reviews? I mean, it's a lot when you're doing 4 videos a day, 7 days a week for years. I mean, the weekends is where I film. I get up extremely early on Sundays. I put in the work and I do it, and I edit everything. I do it all myself, and it's a lot of hours. And I got a pretty high stress, a lot of hours job normally, so the week's pretty tough a lot of times. And I do travel for work and stuff, but people always say, oh, I don't have time. Like, I guarantee you, nobody's busier than me. There's nobody with my day job and as much as I do here, and then trying to manage the wife, the kids, the animals, and everything else in the household. Obviously, my wife is a saint, taking my kids to and from school every day and kind of handling the days, day in and day out on that stuff. But yeah, it's a lot for sure.
It's I think it's one of those things where people say that a lot too. And for like the podcast, I'm probably on the end where I do it kind of when I can get guests and get everything lined up, and it's not a every week thing. It's probably twice a month thing. But I feel like when people say like, oh, like, I just don't, not to me specifically, but people say this a lot, oh, they just don't have time. And I feel like that's so rarely the case, where it's like, well, I think everybody has the same amount of hours in a day. If you work full time, people work, and it's just like, well, I think it's, I just, that excuse kind of bothers me a little bit, because it's like, if you wanted to do something, you could make it, you could put in the time, if nothing else.
If you want something bad enough, you'll find the time to do it. I mean, obviously it's not fun, like going to the gym. I mean, that's something I want to get back. I was a gym rat for years and years, and COVID kind of took that away because things got busier with COVID within my work life. But I need to. It's my own fault that I don't take 30 to 45 minutes every morning like I used to get after the gym like I used to. And I'm finding time for that. I will find time for that. But yeah, it's easy to have excuses, that's for sure. I mean, a lot of people say I would do a YouTube channel, but I don't have the equipment. And I'm like, well, I use an iPad with iMovie to edit my videos, and I have a 9-year-old cell phone that my wife had, and that's what I film my things on. So pretty much everybody's got a cell phone. There's very few that don't have one of those, and iMovie's free. So
yeah, iMovie's free, and phone quality is like the cameras and stuff. I mean, at this point, phones have pretty nice cameras, and it's like,
yeah,
you don't need anything fancy. That's what podcasting too. My setup is probably minimal compared to people that spend lots of money, but it's like, hey, if you have a laptop, I mean, only thing you really need, I think everyone that does a podcast should have a mic, but a laptop and a mic, that's really all you have to have. Like, you can put in, you could use a free program to record it. Probably not the best result, but it's like, what I pay for my program is it's like $15 a month. You can record unlimited audio and video, and you can edit it on there too if you want. I use a different program, but it's like, so you really could spend money, but it's like, to get started, just to give something a try, it's like the entry point for YouTube and podcasts is really not that high for cost.
Not at all. Yeah, it's pretty easy. You just gotta put the reps in. That's the thing. You get those 10,000 hours, as they say. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I think that people just like they look at a finished product when somebody's been doing something for like years, and I've been guilty of this when I've listened to podcasts. There's all these, all these sound effects and all this stuff they've thrown in there. It's just like, how would you even know where to begin? But it's like, yeah, you have to put in the time to learn it, just like anything else, and that's where it ends. And video stuff is like, yeah, it's not easy when you start, but it's like if you put the time into it, you're gonna figure it out.
Yep. Yep. And you get into a rhythm. I mean, one thing that helps me is I don't mess up very often when I record my stuff. I don't like have any flubs or anything. I mean, I speak for a living, so I think that helps me. And I've had a lot of hours speaking before I did this. So I think that helps me. I mean, every once in a while I trip over my words like anybody else, but I don't have to do a ton of editing in my videos. I mean, I have to edit in the pictures and the images and things like that, but I don't have to be like, oh, I messed up this and that. And I think that saves me some time in editing. If I was flubbing lines all the time, it would be a little bit more time consuming.
No, definitely, definitely. No, the channel's been really impressive too, and just like I was looking through, and I watch your even before I thought about asking you as a guest. I've been watching your videos for years, but I just went through there just to kind of just see where things have gone to, and it just, I mean, I don't know the final count on the videos, but all I know is that my finger was tired scrolling to see how many were actually on there too. So I mean, it's been congrats to you, and really you put a lot of hard work into that channel, and it definitely shines through in the videos that you are passion, care about what
Yeah.
you're talking about, and you give honest feedback too, which there are channels out there that do not do that either. So that is, I think, I myself appreciate that for sure.
Yeah, you hear us every once in a while get a comment saying, you weren't negative enough. I'm like, but I don't buy something with my own money that I wouldn't like in the first place. And, here's a flaw here, but it's not the end of life for me. I mean, I'm pretty positive. I mean, and that's one thing. It's funny is like right now I'm in best of mode on my channel. I'm doing all my best of year end lists and stuff on all these figure lines. And it's funny how the worst figures of the year is always the top video out of all those. It's like people want to see the worst. And it's one of those things. You have some channels that say, oh my gosh, I'm getting clicks and views on the negative. I'll just be a negative channel. And man, I could never do that. I just couldn't. I try to live very positive and stuff and try to look at, the bright side of stuff. I just couldn't do negative videos all day long. It just would be no fun.
No, it's just, yeah, that is, yeah. There's enough of like negative things to deal with in life, anyways. Like, why surround yourself with things that are, a side project like this? Is like, why would you? I just don't understand. I was listening.
Action figures. I mean, come on.
Right. It's supposed to be fun. I mean,
Yeah.
I was listening to gosh, I'm forgetting the guy's first name, but he does a YouTube show called Comic Tropes. I'm a big comic book fan myself, and he had an interview that he was doing with, I believe it was with, it was a comic creator. Anyway, they were talking about like his channel and that he'd been kind of like plateauing in views, and maybe this is a theory. It sounded like he knew what he was talking about too, with all of the algorithm stuff. I do not understand in the slightest. And he was going into all this about like how there's things with the algorithm picks up with negativity and stuff too. I'm like, I don't know if that's real, but if that is real, that is very bizarre. It's like, why would you want to spread that too? But yeah, there's enough of that on YouTube and just on the internet in general. And I'm with you. It's like, talk about the things you like. That's what I think.
Yeah, 100%. It's it's a lot of it for me, and probably no different than you. It's like stress relief from day-to-day world. It's like, getting away from that for a tiny window a day.
Yeah, well, exactly. And it's fun to have. I don't know if you feel this way. And my podcast is still pretty new. I started it back in April, so it's still on the new side of things too. But it's nice to have something where it's like I'm totally in control of this. Like when I go to work every day, like I'm lucky to have a job where it's like I don't have somebody breathing down my neck. I kind of make a lot of my own decisions in lots of ways, but I still have a boss and still have all those things.
Yeah.
I like the people I work for, but it's nice to have that thing where it's like, okay, this is kind of my outlet, my thing where I have total control of it, and and it's supposed to be fun. That's the main thing.
Yep, exactly.
So I know that you've been working on a book. So
yeah,
I'm not sure how much you want to talk about that, how many details you can share, but for anybody that hasn't heard this, go into your book a little bit for what you can share.
Yeah. And hopefully it should be here in a couple of weeks. There was, all about it, but there was a lot of COVID, people getting COVID at the end of last year, and that put a couple of week delay on the book a little bit there. But I've been working kind of behind the scenes. I didn't announce it till a couple of weeks ago, but I've been spending on all the time on my channel and everything. But behind the scenes, I've been putting this book together over the last year, and it is on the WWE Jakks Classic Superstars series. So that was a series when Jakks had the toy line before Mattel, who currently has it. And it really changed. I mean, a lot of people say that the old common phrase is "that's so Jakks." People blame Jakks for stuff and things, but we owe a lot to the Jakks Class Superstars line in the action figure world for what they brought and what they changed, and they ushered in what we have from Mattel. They brought that to the table. And, you know, there's a lot of books out there on Hasbro, and there's books on the LJNs back in the day. But I saw a window in the Jakks Classic Superstars where I feel like I'm an expert. I mean, when things are all said and done, I'll have a video every single week for over 5 years on my YouTube channel. I have 2 years worth of content in the can already. That's up on my Patreon. But unboxing every single Jakks Class Superstars video, doing deep dives on it. And a lot of the history of that line is going to be lost because nobody knows it or nobody was collecting in the eye of the storm like I was at the time. So it's a way for me to share some of my stories, share some of the variants and stuff that people don't know about. There's a couple of things with Jeremy Padawer, who's in charge of Jazzwares now. He does the AEW figures. He was a part of Jakks. He was the big wig really ushering this in. And we spent time on the book working on it together and an interview with him in the book as well. And there was a couple of questions that I'm the only one asking it, but there's some certain items that, okay, how rare is this? Where did this come from? Give us the true history on this. And some of that's answered in the book here. And, you know, it's like a 400-page book. So it's a big book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Knock down if you want to, but it's basically every Jakks Classic Superstar figure, mint on card, loose, the story behind them, everything, interviews, things like that. So it's quite the passion project. Just something that's, you know, kind of just, I guess that'll be my legacy maybe, or maybe one of them at the end of the day is, hey, there's a lot of collectors that like books. Maybe, you know, you're yourself. Hey, I don't collect Jakks Class Superstars, but I would like to have a book here and I can thumb through, and it's kind of like you have the collection as you have the book. You got them mint on card, you got them loose, you have everything. So I know I do that. I think there's a lot of collectors out there that way as well. So it's really exciting here to kind of be a published author, I guess, whatever way it goes. But yeah, Jakks Classic Superstars, the complete guide to Jakks Class Superstars should be out here in the next couple of weeks. You know, Amazon will be the place to get it, but I think Barnes and Noble will eventually maybe pick that up as well. And I don't think Walmart and Target would ever sell a book like that. You know, it's not quite the audience for a Walmart Target, but Amazon's where a lot of that stuff does go, and that's where it'll be. And obviously by social medias, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure I'll do a YouTube video on it. I'll be pushing real hard here in the next couple of weeks once it comes out.
Okay. No, that's awesome. I didn't know that Jeremy was. I know we had talked about that you were working on the book. I didn't know that Jeremy was involved in that too. And yeah, he's a very interesting guy too. I mean, prior to the book, how many interactions had you had with Jeremy Padawer?
So it's crazy. Is like I've loved Jeremy since I, was a kid collecting Class Superstars. He was always kind of that mythical figure, and it's weird. I'm not a guy that really wants to meet people. I've never been like, man, I'd really like to meet Bruce Springsteen or something like that. I've just never. I mean, there's a few people like Lemmy from Motorhead and Ken Shamrock was one I always wanted to meet. Ultimate Warrior, a few out there. But if somebody would ask me about a year ago, if you could meet anybody, who would it be? I'm like, Jeremy Padawer. And everybody's like, who's Jeremy Padawer? The average Joe doesn't know who that is, but just his business methods, things like that. I'm in the business world and stuff, and just some of his ideas, and a lot of it translates over. So I just always wanted to pick his brain. Well, I got the opportunity to go to San Diego Comic-Con this year, and of course he's there at the Jazzwares booth up in the top thing, and I got his attention there and got him down, come down, and I mean, we had a great. I mean, he gave me a half hour. We sat there and talked and hugged and became lifelong best friends, something like that. But really hit it off, and I said, Jeremy, here's what I've been working on. I'd messaged him a few times, but it's hard to message somebody like him to get through,
Right. Yeah.
But I obviously made the connection at San Diego Comic-Con. He immediately followed me on social media. We started chatting back and forth and stuff. Okay, let's set up an interview. Here's my questions. Here's things I need to know. Jeremy, do you have any? Because he was so on board. I mean, he is a guy that loves this stuff as well. And he wanted to, document his legacy. A lot of this is kind of his legacy. I mean, he created all this. So to get it from the horse's mouth, in Jeremy, and to get some behind the scenes pictures and some creation stuff and how the line came to fruition and his original hand drawing of what the packaging design would be like. I mean, so many fun things like that. And then he was so really honored. It was cool to see how touched he was that somebody would spend the time to document all this. So he's a big supporter, and now we can officially call him a good friend of the channel.
Yeah, he has such an interesting story too. I think like the Jakks line is a really special, I guess, piece of history too, with just for anybody that doesn't kind of know the story of the Jakks Superstars, our classic Superstars line. At that point in time, like they really didn't celebrate, wrestlers from the past, right? So not knowing that I can remember that anything that had really come out. So that was really like the opening of all that. Where now it's all about nostalgia. We've got Legends lines, we've got all these sorts of things. And I think
Yeah.
like
And that's
how
where it started.
yeah
It started with him doing that. And then chase figures. There was no real chase figures. And he brought in the 1/5s, the 1/20, 1/100s, and things like that. And I mean, it's a wild story. You think he was at Mattel, just, working at Mattel. And at 26 years old, Jakks took him away. He became vice president in charge of all of WWE and having meetings with Vince McMahon and all that kind of stuff. Just wild to think, just crazy.
yeah, there's those few special people that come along that are just like, yeah, let's. I mean, I'm thinking of myself because I'm 26 right now.
Yeah.
Just like accomplishing those type of things. I'm like, I can't even really wrap my head around that at all. So yeah, Jeremy's definitely a special guy, and he's been very successful. And I think
It's funny as we had the discussion because I had a pretty big role when I was 30 for my day job. And I had a little bit of imposter syndrome. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of that, where you just felt like, wait, I shouldn't be here. Everybody else that has this job's 50 plus and I'm 30 years old, and it was it's a weird thing. And he had a little of that too. I don't know if he had it the same degree I did, but you felt like, oh, they're going to figure me out. I shouldn't have this job. But it was funny, and you grow into it. It takes 6 months or whatever, and then bam, you know what you're doing. You're all running. But just very interesting conversation for sure around the book.
yeah, definitely. He's someone that I could listen. Like every time I see a Jeremy interview of any sorts, I go out of my way to listen or read that too because he's just such an interesting guy, and he just has a way with people and telling stories too that he is just for some reason just find him so fascinating.
Yeah, he's got some good stories in the book that you'll see in the book about his first experience with wrestling and how he got into wrestling and fandom and just kind of his whole story arc. So it's pretty fun.
Well,
And he even leaves us with a nice little Easter egg at the end of the interview that blew my mind. And I guess we'll save that for the book.
okay, no, I'm looking forward to reading that. I'm gonna definitely be picking that up. I was at the point where I kind of I was into classics. So what was the first year that classics came out? I'm forgetting.
He was 04.
04, okay.
You were too old. I mean, you would have been like, okay, who is Johnny Rods?
Right,
like,
right.
who's this?
So I remember getting like, I was, and at that point, like, it's not like obviously now where you could, just go on on Peacock and watch everything from the past too. I was definitely the kid that at the video stores. I grew up in a small town in Minnesota where we still had a couple stores, but like the selection's probably not what it would be elsewhere. And but they had some classic tapes, and I rented the same tapes about 50,000 times.
Yeah.
And they just like they'd get a new one every once in a while, and it'd be like a random, WrestleMania 12 that all of a sudden just popped up for no reason.
Yep. I have fond memories as a little kid. There was old NWA. It was called Night of the Skywalkers. And it was the Midnight Express versus the Road Warriors on the scaffold match. I remember just being like a 6-year-old kid. Like, I rented that thing 100 times. And it wasn't even that great of a match, but just like them fighting up in the air like that, this is the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
But same thing, going to the video store, just rent the same thing a million times.
I wish that I personally like miss that aspect of it too, where it's nice to have everything where you can just go and it's like, oh, I want to watch this match, and you can find it. If it's, there's even stuff from like Japan, and like, okay, you could find that stuff online somewhere. Even if it's not, like obviously New Japan World, they've got a lot of stuff there, but you could find it somewhere. But I kind of missed that point, even though I was probably towards the tail end of the VHS and then, into the DVDs and stuff. But there's something about like getting a new tape or getting a new DVD or getting stuff that it's just not as easily accessible. So it almost made it more like special. Like now I still go watch all this stuff, but it's always there.
When I was in high school, I was tape trading and, just like early AOL chat rooms, like early internet type stuff. And I'm just a little teenager. And somehow or another, I came across a guy in Japan that wanted wrestling from America. And I wanted wrestling from Japan. And we became friends and we tape traded VHS tapes back and forth. And I remember being in high school, all my buddies, you got to see this. And it was the Terry Funk Cactus Jack death match from Japan, bringing that over. I mean, I was a huge Terry Funk. And we had never seen anything like that. I mean, everybody sees that stuff now, but I can't even explain like being 14 years old when that came out and there was no internet. So there was no real clips of it or anything. I mean, there was, but not that we saw. And to watch that video with your friend group, like, what the heck is this? Like, just wild and all that stuff. And then getting Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 for the Nintendo 64 was such a big moment. My friends and I, we couldn't believe it because it was like the No Mercy revenge games, but with like double the roster and more matches, more things you could do. I mean, I miss that like excitement, and you're exactly right. You know, now we have everything in your hand. It's just not the same though. It's weird.
Yeah, and I think it's that way with figures. I think a little bit too, where it's like so I was born in '97. The internet was a thing. I wasn't on the internet as a kid, like not even remotely. Too like I think we got the internet when I was 12. Like lots of houses had it at that point. We were kind of on the tail end of that too. So I had no idea what was coming out like figure wise either. Yeah. So, growing up, so I lived an hour east of Fargo where we would go, and there was a Toys R Us there too. And just like you mentioned this before, as being a kid and being in the toy aisle, just a full section of, I mean, I was into other stuff, but talking wrestling specific too, and you had no idea what you'd find. It's just, there was just wall to wall of figures. And I miss that feeling.
Yeah.
Able to just
every once in a blue moon, there's a surprise that comes through.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's such a shocking thing. And there's been a couple of times over the last couple of years, maybe it was a McFarlane toy or whatever that nobody had said anything about. And all of a sudden you walk in a store and there it is. It's so rare. I mean, it's like winning the lottery, but there's something so magical about that. Just not knowing what could possibly be there. That was such a fun thing. And it's kind of gone now. I mean, you still have it, but it's not the same.
No, now it's like, the only equivalent of that now is like you see pictures from Toy Fair, like whatever, things like that. It's like, but you don't get to go home with it, display it, all those things. But yeah, I don't think there's any coming back from that. But they are good memories that kids at this point just will never understand. I don't think,
never get it.
So okay, well, as far as like wrestling now, what are you keeping up with as far as wrestling goes now that we're into the year 2024? How much do you keep up?
Yeah, I keep up. I mean, that's when I edit most of my videos while I'm watching that stuff. So I don't know if I could sit and watch wrestling without multitasking, be it my day job or editing, but it's a nice thing to have in the background. You don't have to be glued to it, but you can have it going, and that's kind of how I do it. But I watch everything AEW. I watch everything WWE. And then I try to watch Impact, I guess going back to TNA now. So I usually have that on Thursday nights. And then once the blue moon, I'll watch like an MLW or something like that. But I don't do any of the Japan stuff anymore. After the All Japan stuff, kind of all those guys kind of went away. I just kind of fell out of it. So I got enough, obviously, in America to keep me busy. And then I do hit indie shows on a fairly regular basis in my area too. So yeah, I'm pretty much into it. All of my friends that I grew up with really aren't into it at all anymore. And it's like, I'm not crazy passionate, like believing it's like real and stuff, but I still follow along.
Sure. We're at the point now where there's like, you could spend, I think, every waking moment watching something current that is so hard to like keep up on. Like you said, just the stuff in America alone, and you've got stuff in like, I wish I had more time to watch stuff in, Mexico and like almost.
I don't know what I would do if I had like a WWE network when I was a kid. I mean, I would have literally never left the house. I never would have. I mean, I would have just watched 24/7. That's all I would have done.
Yeah, I remember saying that too to, I don't know if it's my wife or might have been my mom when I was talking about wrestling when I first, like when the network kind of first came out. And I don't think I got it until when it came out in like 13 or 14. I think I got it in like 15. So at that point, I was still like at very end of, what was my last year of high school, I think is when I got it. So at that point, it's like, yeah, like if I was 6 to 12 years old and I would have had this would have been not a good thing because I would have done nothing else.
Yeah, I would have been the most pale kid ever, and I would have been malnutrition because I'd never go upstairs to get something to eat. I mean,
I know that would have seriously would have been me, because if I was willing to, there was times where, like going back to the tapes where I think I'm pretty sure I had like a Royal Rumble or something and watched it all in one day. And I think that thing went right back in the next day, watched it again like that. And that was a common occurrence.
Yep. 100%.
100%. All right, Kyle, well, we've been very generous with your time, especially with our first take of this podcast. So I'm going to let you go here. But before we get out of here, where can people find you online, and where can they go to support you?
Yeah, there's all kinds of places. So if you search at Kyle Peterson, I think it's Kyle Peterson 1980 on YouTube, you'll find my YouTube channel. But there's also Kyle Peterson 2.0, so you can search that. I got 2 YouTube channels, videos every single day over there. You can find me on Patreon, search Kyle Peterson if you want even more bonus content. And then, of course, social media, Sir Paul64 on the X, and then _Kyle_Peterson on Threads, if anybody uses that, I don't know, and on Instagram out there. So you can find me. If you search my name in action figures, you'll find me out there somewhere.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Kyle, for making this happen and for all the time you gave me today. Appreciate it. At some point, we'll have to have you back on if you've got anything cool coming up in the future. So we got the book today. If there's more things, we'd love to have you back on. That's for sure.
I got a few things in the works for later this year, so that might be a good thing.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kyle.
Thank you.